Hey folks, Rosendo Pili here from MLH. It looks like my screen's working this time, so really excited about that. If you were joining us from the previous stream, you'll know that we experienced some minor audiovisual issues, but we are good to go now. It looks like everything is great. I'm glad that y'all can see me. Yeah, if you're just coming in, we're not done for today. In fact, we're just getting started. Global Hack Week, Security Week just kicked off a couple of hours ago, and this is actually our second workshop for the entire week. It's going to be exciting. We've got Twilio joining us. Kelly Robinson, a developer, developer evangelist from Twilio, will be showing us how to use Twilio to secure our web applications. So yeah, if you haven't already, check out the link that I'm about to drop in chat here. Make sure you register. Make sure you check in. Make sure you get all of the credit for joining us today during these awesome workshops. And yeah, just make sure you keep it plugged in because we are about to get it going. Honestly, I don't want to eat up too much time. I just want to make sure everyone is in here. I want to make sure everyone is actually through the ad block and we are ready to watch and learn all about Twilio. So yeah, if you've got the link, make sure, like I said, register, check in. Click into the prerequisites. Make sure you have a Twilio account. Obviously, make sure you've got Twilio CLI installed. And if you're wondering about any of the challenges that are available for today, make sure you go to ghw.mlh.io/challenges to get an idea of what we've got going on. By the way, you could download CLI if you want to. You won't need it necessarily to follow along with today's content, but it's probably a nice to have just in case you want to learn a little bit more hands-on. It's optional for today. So thank you, IMSNOS Imsnas. I apologize for butchering your name and not pronouncing it correctly. I already know, but that is the link for y'all. Yeah. So without any further ado, once again, I would like to introduce the illustrious Kelly Robinson from Twilio. Give her a round of applause, y'all.
Thanks for the intro. Yes, this is the Twilio session. Like Rosendo said, we're going to be doing some live coding today with Twilio if you wanted to follow along. If not, I hope you can learn something just from kind of watching what we're going to be up to today. Hi everyone, good to see you. If you want to just drop what country you're in the chat, if you don't mind sharing. One of the things we're going to be doing today is kind of looking at international phone number input as a way that you can look at security. We've got some people in the US, Canada, India. Great. I'm seeing lots of people sharing where they are. Awesome. This is flowing pretty well with some of the examples that I already have going. I am here in the US, so thank you all for joining from the different spots that you're coming in from. This is hilarious. I'm actually getting a spam call on my phone right now. we're going to be using our phones today for some of the testing. If you're in the US and can easily receive text messages, that's one of the things we will be using. Also, if you have WhatsApp, you don't necessarily need SMS today for the stuff that we're using. So one of the things I wanted to get started with is just kind of talking about how you can use Twilio for security and stuff that we're going to be doing today. So like, what is Twilio? Some of you might be familiar with Twilio, kind of like raise your hand proverbially in the chat if you've ever like heard of Twilio, used Twilio before. That would be awesome to see like if people are familiar with that. If you have used Twilio before, have you ever used Twilio for two-factor authentication, for sending one-time passcodes, for doing anything with security? Twilio is kind of known for having these communications APIs. You might have used it if you've used Twilio in the past to send an SMS, reply to an SMS, make a voice call, use WhatsApp, email, video, these types of communication channels. But did you know that it's actually one of the biggest reasons that people use Twilio is for this account security use case? And that's the stuff that I focus on at Twilio, is things like phone verification, two-factor authentication, phone number intelligence, fraud prevention, spam detect, like all these things that you can use phone numbers as kind of identifiers in order to get information about a person, make sure that the person is who they're claiming to be, those types of things. So that's one of the things that we're going to be using Twilio for today. Yeah, and so Twilio actually acquired a company called Authy about 8 years ago. If anybody's ever used Authy before, that's one of the challenges this week for the Global Hack Week, is just to install Authy and get that set up on one of your global accounts. Twilio can be used a lot for security, and I think that's one of the really cool things that we do. So like Rosendo said, my name is Kelly Robinson. I live in upstate New York now. I went to the University of Michigan. I don't know if we happen to have any Michigan folks in the chat here. I like to share that. Grew up in Michigan. And now I work as the account security evangelist at Twilio. I've been in this role for a little over 5.5 years now, almost 6 years. So I've been working on this for a while, and it's been really cool to see how Twilio has grown into the space of doing security and that kind of stuff. From our beginnings as just like a calling API and an SMS API, we do so many things now. So it's one of those things that, like, I saw somebody say, I've heard of Twilio, but not for 2FA. Like, there's lots of things that Twilio does that like I'm still not super familiar with, because we do a lot of cool stuff now, and like it can be used for a lot of different use cases. So the two main things that Twilio provides for account security, the two main tools, we have two APIs. The first is the Lookup API, and this is, it is kind of what it sounds like. You can look up a phone number with this, and there's a lot of different information that you can get about a phone number. Everything from just like, is this phone number a potentially valid phone number, all the way to like, is this phone number a phone number that's been SIM swapped recently? Like, who is the caller name attached to this phone number? What carrier is on this phone number, or is this phone number attached to? What is the line type of this phone number? So people use this API in a lot of different ways, and often that's tied to a security use case. And then the second API that we have is called our Verify API. And that's an API that allows you to then interact more with that phone number. And one of the main ways that we do this is by having that kind of use case driven SMS, WhatsApp, voice, email, whatever channel you want, all under one API, to send that one-time passcode to say, here's like a 6-digit number. Can you verify that with us, that, once you receive that 6-digit code, the user can then input that back into your website. And we're going to be using both of these today in the example that we're going to be building. So just a little bit more about the Lookup API. This makes onboarding simple and secure. And so one of the things that we see a lot of people thinking about is like, how can you add security without adding too much friction? And because Lookup is like an information API, this can all happen in the background, right? And so you can look up a phone number, like when somebody's inputting the phone number, and make sure that that's a valid phone number. Tell them whether or not like they might have a typo. Preventing fraud by identifying compromised numbers. I mentioned that you can actually detect SIM swaps with our API, and that's like a really cool way that financial institutions like banks and that kind of stuff are starting to use this. And then just ensuring data integrity. security, right? Like you want to make sure that when somebody enters a phone number into your website, that they're entering valid information, and that, having solid data integrity actually helps with like preventing fraud and preventing abuse in your system too. And then verify as the API will also help prevent that fraud and preventing the fake accounts, because then somebody's entering a phone number into your website, they could enter a valid phone number, but how do you know that that phone number is actually one they have control over? And that's what the verify API helps you do. We're also introducing like some more frictionless channels here, so that not every time you have to like enter that one-time passcode. This is kind of like the future of account security, is how you can make sure that you can do all of this without the user having to like be involved with it, and balancing that friction, right? Yeah, so somebody said they use Twilio API on one of their backends for sending OTPs via SMS and WordPress, WhatsApp, maybe. I don't know what WP is, but yeah, we have different channels for that, which is cool. And then you can use verify at any stage, right? Like today we're going to be using it kind of as like a sign up form for the phone verification side of things, but a lot of people use this at login for protecting logins, and that could be both like the main login protection mechanism or the second factor, the 2FA side of things is another way that people use that, or all the way down to like different account changes, authorizing payments, that kind of stuff. You could use it kind of wherever within an application makes sense where you wanted to add that additional security. All right, this question, are we using Twilio to host your code or using our own hosting service? You today will be using Twilio to host your code. If you're signing up for a Twilio account and asking that question, like you can say whatever you want at this point, because you're going to be using this for like testing accounts. So we do use that information down the line, but today we're going to be using Twilio for hosting the code. All right, so like let's start building. As I can see some people getting into their Twilio accounts. Twilio is free to sign up. There's also should be a promo code that was provided to you all. So you can go ahead. You shouldn't need to enter a credit card at any point during the process today. Sign up for a Twilio account, try Twilio. If you want to download the CLI, you can do that. And then, like I mentioned, you'll need a phone with either SMS or WhatsApp capabilities. All right, and then this is what I'm going to try to get through today. We only have an hour here. I don't know if we're going to be able to do all of this. This is like 4 steps, but this is like a whole phone verification project. So depending on the questions in the chat, like it's totally fine if we don't get through all of this. We're starting with some code, but this is kind of like the agenda for today, right? In terms of like, let's build some phone verification. So one of the things I'm going to start with here is actually just like showing you some of how the Lookup API works. So what we're going to start with is like deploying a starter phone number input project that then we can use to look up phone numbers. Let me go ahead and get out of my work Slack. And then we're going to detect landlines once we have that phone number input, because today we're decided we're only going to be using the SMS and WhatsApp channels. The Verify API also does support calling someone to give them that one-time passcode if you want. But today we're just going to kind of rule out that use case. So we're only going to be, we're going to like filter out the landline numbers. And then what we do once we have that phone number, we're going to send them that OTP and then check the OTP. You can use Twilio and Postman. So that's a thing that you can definitely do. So to start, while you might be like going ahead and setting up your Twilio account, let me just go ahead and show you like what the Lookup API looks like with the Twilio CLI. So I'm already logged into the CLI. I can go ahead and use my autocorrect to kind of fill in some of the CLI input here. So what I'm going to be doing is there's really only like one endpoint here that we're going to be using, and that's the fetch endpoint. And I didn't provide any like parameters here, so it's going to give me an error. But if I wanted to provide it a phone number, I can go ahead and do that. And the phone number that I'm going to use is actually like the number that you can call if you want to talk to Twilio. So this is like the number that's on our website. If you want to talk to us there, it kind of gives you this default output here. Let me go ahead and just like make this full screen. So if I wanted to have that in JSON, I can specify that I want the output to be JSON there. And then you can see some of the input or the response that comes back from the Lookup API. And so right away you have this phone number. And this is what we call E.164 format. If you've never heard or seen phone numbers like this before, like being in the US, this was not something that I saw a lot of before I started working at a phone number company. But this is a standardized way of representing phone numbers is by having this plus with a country code plus all the numbers after it. And then the Lookup API will also return the national format here. So in the US, you have the area code followed by a 7-digit phone number. And then you also have the country calling code and the country code here. The cool thing about this API request that I just made here, somebody asked, is Twilio free? Twilio is free to use. API requests, depending on the type of API request you make, are going to cost like per request. This specific lookup request is actually free to use forever. So this is something that you do not have to pay for even, once you get over a certain threshold of requests, because it's only returning formatting information. If you want to start getting more data packages about a phone number, then we start charging you depending on the request. But just for an example, like if I wanted to try to request this invalid phone number, the API is also super useful for that because it'll say, this is not a valid phone number, and then here's the reason for that. And so this one is pretty clearly a phone number that's too short. You might be able to figure that out with something like a regular expression. I don't recommend using regular expressions for detecting phone number validity because there's a lot of different ways a phone number could or could not be valid. All right. And then if you want to start to get into some of the more interesting types of details about a phone number, instead of just saying, I want this phone number, I'm also going to start to specify some fields. And for this one, I want to get the line type intelligence. And I'll show you what that looks like here. Actually, I'm going to use, I don't know if anybody's familiar with this plugin called JQ, but it like provides nicer formatting for command line output. Definitely recommend trying that. You can pipe whatever output you want to JQ, and it'll basically do nice formatting like this. So you can see here, once I specify the line type intelligence package, I start to get more information back about this phone number. And so you can see this is a Twilio number. So if you ever like I just actually, let me say this, I got this spam call. This could be risky, but we're doing it live. I got this spam call from a number like 3 minutes ago. Let's see like who the carrier of this was. If this is Twilio, I'm going to feel really bad, but it usually isn't because Twilio is a little too expensive for scammers. So I don't know like who IP Horizon LLC is, but like this is a real spam number that I just got. You can kind of look this up. If it ever is a Twilio number that is spamming you, definitely like let us know. We have a whole process for that. For reporting abuse on our network. But this is one of the things that you could start to see about these types of numbers is like you get a number and you're like, okay, who was calling? Like, was that a Twilio number that was calling me? You can use the Lookup API to find that out. You can see that this is a landline number, which is interesting. A lot of times you'll see that spam calls are coming from VoIP numbers, voice over IP numbers. And so that's like another interesting way to start to like figure out some information about different types of phone numbers. Is there Composer for Twilio for Laravel installation? Yes, there is. If you look at the Twilio for PHP libraries, you can find information about installing Twilio for Laravel. And I believe we have blog posts about how to set up Twilio with Laravel. Probably even some for account security and verify related. All right, so the next step that we're going to do is I'm going to head over to our code exchange, which is kind of our repository of code samples. And if you want to share this link in the chat, make sure that you guys are getting this. Today I'm going to be using JavaScript because the code exchange is really cool in that it lets you host code on Twilio. When you host code on Twilio, our serverless platform right now only supports JavaScript. So that decision's like a little bit made for me with the example that I'm using today. But you can use Twilio in any programming language that you want. Our docs by default have examples in like 7 different programming languages. So the stuff that I'm doing today, you can definitely write in Python, Ruby, PHP, whatever makes sense for you. I'm also going to be using some like front end HTML and JavaScript as well. So I have this example application here that I'm going to be using to get us started today, because there's certain things that you want to build when you're building something like phone number verification that like don't necessarily make sense to like build on this in this context, because it's not necessarily like the Twilio part of it. So this is an example that I built that will be really useful for you going forward, which is just how do you collect international formatted telephone numbers. And this example uses this plugin called International Telephone Input that's really handy. So it basically allows users to select the country that they're coming from and input the phone number in whatever format that they have there. I help sponsor this project through Twilio just because I think it's really useful and it's really well maintained. The organizer is great. So we really like this project. So if you have access to this, go ahead and make sure you're logged into your Twilio account, and then you can click deploy this application. What this is going to do is it's going to set up some example code hosted on Twilio using Twilio's serverless platform. So that's going to be something similar to like Amazon's serverless platform, other types of serverless applications that you've used. This code will be hosted and run on Twilio, and we'll be able to see all of that code and edit all of that code. And now that we have this live application, you can go ahead and, so now I could like go ahead and use that. What was the number that I was using before? This like spam number that I wanted to. I can go ahead and like paste that in there. And then what all this does right now is say like, hey, this is a valid number or it's not. And I'm going to translate this from whatever, if I wanted to put dashes in here, it's going to translate it back to E.164 format, which is that like standardized format. If you're collecting phone numbers, you probably want to have that be what's stored in your database instead of collecting it in whatever format a user provides. If I try to type in an invalid number here, it's going to tell me that it's an invalid phone number. You can see here that it has a few different countries that are highlighted in the drop down. This is something that we can change, and we can go ahead. I'm going to hop back over to the consoles and open up where this code was deployed. So I'm in my functions and assets section of the Twilio console. If you don't have that pinned to your side, you can click search functions up here and click that. I will go ahead and refresh this page. I'll go ahead and actually let me go ahead and paste that into the chat in case anybody else needs it. So you can see here, I have 2 of these international telephone input services here because I have an example one here. We're doing this live, right? So this one's actually like the finished version. This first one here is the finished version of what I've built in case something goes wrong, in case I need to go back and copy code, stuff happens, right? So this is actually the one that I just deployed here. And then you can go in here and you can see this code, the code that we have here. So one of the things I mentioned, and I'll show you like a little way that we can modify this really quickly, is you can see this preferred countries list here. Like instead of Colombia, if we wanted this to be Canada, I saw that there was like some people from Canada in the chat. I can go ahead and click deploy, save this file, deploy this, and then it will go ahead and build everything, make sure the live logs are on there. And then once this is built and deployed, instead of this being Colombia here, we should see that this has changed to Canada. Okay, now it's deployed. Yay, so now we have Canada here. So that's a feature of this international telephone input plugin that allows you to build this like nice drop down, because it turns out some of these things are not exactly things that you want to be like building from scratch, nor do I recommend that. Cool. So we've deployed the sample project. That's like kind of step one in our to-do list that we were going to do. The next thing that we want to do is add that line type detection now. So essentially what we want to do is be turning this form into a phone verification form. And right now all it does is that like formatting check for us. So I'm going to go back into the console here and I'm going to be going into my lookup function. And so this is called basically this is what's called when you hit verify on this project from the front end. This is going to call into this function that then calls the Twilio API. And you can see like, I don't need this like course support here. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. And you can see what this is doing here. We're returning some JSON. We're checking the input parameters here. And then we're starting to call the Twilio client. So this is how you set up the Twilio client inside of JavaScript, especially this is specific to Twilio functions. This would be something that you would import if you were doing this in like Express or whatever client you were using for your server-side JavaScript. And then this line 27 here is like where we're calling the Twilio lookup API. And so one of the things that we can do here is instead of just calling fetch here, we want to call fetch with fields. And so this is similar to what we did here, where we added this additional parameter here. We want to call that inside of this fetch function here. And of course, because I don't remember the exact syntax for this, I'm going to go check our documentation. So if you want to look at the lookup documentation, you can share the link for that. And so this is where I was saying, like, you can do this in whichever language that you want. I'm going to go ahead and click on the different like data packages over here. So we have kind of the basic lookup for a valid number that's shown here. And then what I'm going to be using is that line type intelligence because we want to detect landlines is this next step that we're doing. And then you can get a preview of some of the other stuff that we do on the left here, which is like the SIM swap detection, call forwarding, live activity, identity match, that kind of stuff. So let me go into the line type intelligence and make sure that I'm like copying the right thing. So I'll go ahead and copy the fields there. I can never remember if it's like camel case or snake case for doing this. And so then, you know, like any good developer, I both copy the documentation and then I'm constantly like printing out the output to make sure that I have what I want. So I'm going to save that and deploy that. I have live logs on so that when this deploys, I will get that feedback in the logs here in terms of like what it's doing. The other thing that I want to do here is I can say, let me make sure I'm doing this, what I want to be doing. So the other thing that I can do is detect the landlines here. And so lookup is going to, that variable is going to store that JSON response. And so I want to go ahead and look into the line type intelligence output that comes with this. And you can see in the documentation what that looks like. And so this is a nested variable that's going to have its own object inside of that. And we want to be looking at this type there. We want to say, is that type going to be a landline? And if so, we're going to throw an error for our purposes today. So if that type, we also need to specify type there. So if that's landline, this is where you could do whatever you wanted in this circumstance. We're going to throw an error today, but you could make sure to specify that the channel that you want to use, if you're going to contact this person, could then be a voice call, you know, that type of thing. So this is, you know, do what you want with this, but we're going to throw an error for simplicity today. And so I'm going to say, please use a mobile number. All right, I think that looks good. Add all of that. Saved all of our functions. It won't let you deploy unless you save first. It's just like a thing about the serverless functions. If you want to use this further, And then the other thing that's handy is because we've already looked up this like spam caller for me, and I know this is a landline number. It's actually really funny. It's kind of hard to find example landline numbers. I was doing this for a blog post recently, and I ended up like using like the New York City Hall for this as an example. But like even a lot of local businesses use VoIP numbers because they're using companies like Twilio for these types of things. So ideally, here, let me refresh this page because that might be necessary. All right, it's deployed. Ideally, this will throw us an error once we say that. So it says invalid phone number, which is live logs are off. That might be because of the way that the error handling is happening. So let me make sure that this is, yeah. So basically it's saying like, it's always saying invalid phone number regardless of what the actual error is. But if I look at the console log error in the index page, we should have, yeah, that error that we propagated to it. So it's saying, please use a valid error message. We could change this to, instead of being the invalid phone number, be that JSON error instead, and then that should propagate that error message back out to the front end. All right, cool. So we were like 2 steps through this process. We've built, you know, a phone number input form. And then we've gone ahead and detected the landline phone numbers. And so instead of it just like blindly accepting any phone number, we've already filtered out some of the phone numbers that we might not want to accept for our use cases. This is a thing that like, this is going to depend on like the application that you're building. Maybe you don't want to accept VoIP numbers. This is some things that we see like banks and other kinds of those companies that end up wanting to make sure that they have like real users that are unique, those types of things. They want to ensure that it's only a mobile number. So that's one of the reasons that people will use Lookup for that. Cool. So those are like kind of the first 2 steps to use the Lookup API for this. That's a really cool way to get started with just like some simple security on your project, even if it's just that kind of like user experience upgrade of making sure that you're giving feedback to the person about whether or not the phone number they inputted was valid. Cool. So the next thing that we're going to do is then start to integrate Verify into this. And to do that, we first need to create a Verify service. And so you can head over to the Twilio console and we can create a new Verify service for this. So you can see I have a few examples in here, including the one for my kind of completed project. So I'm going to go ahead and make this like my Kelly's Bakery because I want to make sure that like my, you know, new bakery company that I'm creating has security for it. Like I've talked about today, we're only going to be using the SMS and WhatsApp channels today. Verify also does support email and voice. But we only want to support SMS and WhatsApp today. This friendly name will be used in the templates that we send the one-time passcodes in. This can be changed later, but just an FYI that you want this to be something that you're okay with people seeing. And then we can go ahead and create this service. The service is going to be kind of a collection of configurations for the project. So this will have things like the friendly name, like the code length. So if you wanted the code to be longer or shorter, and then individual settings based on the channel. We're not going to dive into all of that today, but you can kind of see on the right here what the preview of this is going to look like in terms of the output. So if I wanted to change that to like Kelly's Cookery instead of Kelly's Bakery, that would change in this output here. Awesome. So now that we have the Verify service created, that is necessary, and the service it is necessary in order to call the API. So the next thing that we want to do is, instead of immediately returning kind of feedback to the user after they input their phone number, we want to send the number that they input a one-time passcode. And to do that, we're going to do everybody's favorite thing, which is copy and paste documentation code. And we're going to be jumping over to the Verify API now to do this. And so I will go ahead and paste the Verify API docs in the chat if those can be shared with the group. And then I'm looking at this now. You can kind of see this is divided into 3 steps here. Step 1, create a verification service. That's what we just did. You can also do that from the from the API, but I like to do it in the console because it's kind of like a one and done thing. You don't necessarily need to do it programmatically because you're not doing it often. You only need one verify service for sending many verifications. So I can go ahead and step down to our next step, which is sending a verification token. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this code right here, which is the code that we need in order to send that verification. And move back in our lookup JavaScript function here, and this is what's going to happen. Let's do this after we look up the phone number, but before we return any kind of like validity here. I guess we can do this after we determine. Let's do it inside of the success block, actually. So saying we know that this phone number is valid. Before we return it, let's send that OTP. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. Do like a little bit of formatting on it. And then this is where you need to paste in your verify service SID. This is something that like in a normal project, I probably would save this as an environment variable instead of hard coding it in here. However, it's not like a super secret piece of information because you would need both my account SID and my auth token in order for this to be valid anyway. And I'm going to delete this after this example. So it's not something that I have to be like super nervous about sharing with a group right now. But, you know, for best practices longer term, I definitely would recommend storing that in an environment variable. And then instead of the hard coded phone number there, I'm going to go ahead and use our phone number that's passed in here, which is in this event.phone variable. And then channel is something too that like you could set the channel dynamically here. So if you have a landline phone number, you could set this to call. If you had a user, you could do the lookup and determine the country that they're in. And if they're in a country like Brazil, where WhatsApp is really popular, you could set this channel to WhatsApp. I'm going to leave this hard coded to SMS. If you're doing this today and WhatsApp is easier for you, you can change that to WhatsApp. Those are kind of the options that will work for us today. Do what's best for you. This is something that, again, could be hard coded, wouldn't necessarily be a big deal, or it could be set dynamically. And so I'm going to go ahead and set this to a verification. I need to await this because I'm using async await in this JavaScript setting here. And then like I like to do, going to go ahead and print out the output just to see what we have. And since I know that the lookup's working pretty well now, I'm going to go ahead and delete that just so that I have a little bit of stuff cleaned up here. And so what we did here is we added 3 lines of code, if you're being generous, in terms of the amount of code that we added to send out that verification. And once this is deployed, hopefully when we run our code here, we'll at least receive a verification token as part of the API. And this is really cool because verify, like you could do this like theoretically with Twilio's programmable SMS. You would have to generate that 6-digit code for yourself, which like that part isn't hard. The part that like gets to be harder when you're building out this system is then you have to like associate that with a user. You have to think about things like timeouts. You have to think about things like expirations and rate limiting. And the verify API, there's like enough that you need to think about for this specific use case. And it's such a common use case that the verify API handles a lot of that for you. So I think it's like a really nice way to do this if you're building phone verification from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my phone number here. Cool. And this is something that now if you are following along but not coding along, I'll go ahead and paste this in for you to try. This is the live application that I have deployed, and I got a code. I got a 6-digit code to my Google Voice number here. Also, if you want to see my puppy, that's what's happening on my phone there. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to build like a way to check this, right? But that's pretty cool, right? That I was able to get a 6-digit code without a lot of effort there in terms of the actual lines of code written, sent to my phone. That'll expire in 10 minutes. That'll be good. So that's a pretty cool way to get started with phone verification. And now I get to build the fun part of like building in the way of testing that code. So I'm going to head back over to my HTML page because what I want to do next is build basically another form field for accepting the code input. And so again, copying and pasting sounds good. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one OTP. So instead of basically having like a lookup form here, I'm going to add a second form below this that will accept the OTP and enter the one-time passcode. This will be my OTP. Actually, let me get rid of the ID here. Just have a name on this. And then I'm going to keep the values there the same. We'll keep this to check instead of verify. And then the other thing that I want to do here is I only want to have this show up after you've successfully sent the verification code. So I'm going to hard code in some CSS here, which I know is usually not recommended, but for our purposes, it's fine. And so this will be hidden when the page initially loads. And then once we have, let's add another form down here so that we can start to manipulate it. So in the same way that we're grabbing our lookup form, I'm going to grab this by its ID, and then I might need this in a couple of spots. Yeah, because what we want to do here is instead of just saying here's the phone number, if it's a successful lookup, we also want to make sure that we display this form now so that people can input the OTP. Cool. So hopefully that makes sense. Go ahead and save this. Get this deployed, check things kind of as we go. This is something that you could also be doing this locally and then deploy it to Twilio as you're ready to, and be testing this like kind of on a local host if you didn't want to have to wait for this build feedback. For our purposes, I feel like it's nice to have something that's like live and able to test. So what this should do now is, so now when I click verify, it pops up this OTP form for me. So that's pretty cool. So we're making progress here. If I like do anything here, it's like not actually doing anything yet. So next we need to build the functionality for this to actually check the code. And the nice thing about the verify API is that we have the ability to send a verification code, but we also have the ability to check the verification code. And I think this is like the really nice thing about this API that would make it a lot harder to build this all yourself is in order to check the verification code, all you need is the phone number or the email or the identifier that you sent the code to and the code itself. You don't need to create like a temporary database. Like you probably use something like Redis for this to store this code temporarily, to connect these two things for however long you wanted them to be associated. You're using the API to test that. So it's kind of this like stateless thing that makes it a lot nicer for you to build out quickly and easily. Let me just check the comments here. Cool. Unfortunately, I don't know the issues happening with the promo codes, but we can definitely get that sorted out after the workshop if you're still having issues. Cool. So what I'm going to be doing is going back into functions, and I'm going to add a second function here so that I can call something different when we have the other form submitted. And so I'm going to call this one check because I'm creative. By default, this is a protected function, which means it can only be called by something with a Twilio signature. This is great if you're doing something like responding to an incoming text message. For our use cases, needs to be available to the public. Excuse me. And then looking at the clock here, we could write this from scratch, but I'm going to copy and paste in some code to get us started. So this is some like boilerplate code that I have here that's very similar to the example that it provides when you create a new function, and similar to kind of the boilerplate of the lookup function here too. So again, we're creating a response, we're setting the response type on that, instantiating the Twilio client, and then we have this like kind of section here that we want to add in. And so what we're going to be receiving in this function is that phone number and the one-time code. So like the 6-digit code that somebody types in, and we want to validate whether or not that is correct. And so I'm going to be using our trusty documentation for that. So I can go ahead and paste this in terms of kind of like what we need to get started with, fill in the blanks here. So we have our verify service SID that we want to call this function with. This is the verification checks endpoint instead of the verifications endpoint. We're going to be using the event.phone for this, and then we'll call this event.otp. We haven't actually sent this over yet, so we can call it whatever we want. That's kind of, up to us in terms of what we want to call it. So we can call this the check variable. My spacing's all off here, but I don't have enough time to correct that right now. And then what we want to do here is say if so let's look at the output for this API and see what it gives us. And so the thing that we want to check here is actually the status output. When you send a verification, the status will be pending. And when you check a verification, if the code is the correct code, the status will change to approved. And so we want to check that the status is approved. So if check.status is approved, then we can go ahead and return our response. Let's go ahead and create the response. So response set body. So this will be success is true. And we'll return the callback with the response. Thinking you'll add this to your restaurant website project. I love it. So this should be good. All right, so the thing that we need to do now is make sure that this function is called and it gets both this phone and the event OTP. So let's go ahead and save this file. And then we need to go back over to the index. And basically, I'm going to delete some of this extra code here. What I want to do now is we're doing a process. We have a process function here for calling that lookup function from our front end. This is what gets called when you hit that initial like verify here. And then we want to basically duplicate this so that we can do something similar when we are processing the OTP. So let me go ahead and just paste this in so that I can make sure that we get this kind of wrapped up and have time for questions if needed. So this is basically the same function as above. Instead of, I think I called this other one code, but we named it OTP in our other function. So I'm going to send this data over to the API. This is what's going to get sent to the check function. And then once this check box with check form is submitted on our front end here with that form that will show up down here, this is what will get called with the data that we send at the phone and the OTP, and then we'll check some information about it. So we're checking the success category or the success field on the response. All right, and then the last thing that we need to do is also just make sure we add an event listener. This is all vanilla JavaScript. If you're using anything like Vue, React, whatever JavaScript framework you want to be using, even like something like jQuery, uh, you can change this to suit your needs there. I like to use vanilla JavaScript for like the examples that I'm doing, just because like it's a little bit less or it's generally like more universal, so that you can use it for like the education purposes there, but you definitely don't have to use vanilla JavaScript for this. All right, so let me go ahead and save this. If by some miracle I like got all of these correct, then this should work when we try running this again. And if not, we will debug as needed. All right, let me make sure my live logs are turned back on. I don't like that those get turned off, but we'll see. All right, so 518-303-2544. Okay, so at least we're still popping up the OTP form. I'm still receiving a new code. These codes expire in 10 minutes. So, I first sent an example code to this number 11 minutes ago. So I'm getting a new code now. If you request the same code within 10 minutes, you might notice that you're getting like the same code sent to your phone. It doesn't rotate, and that's intentional because of just like the user experience side of things. Okay, so that didn't work for some reason. It didn't check the code, at least. I'm not getting any. I was trying to get it to give me an error with an invalid code. All right, so I'm getting some information back. This is about the code that was sent. So this is coming from the lookup function. I'm not sure if the check function was getting called or not. Let's go ahead and see what's happening there. All right, so we have this process code function. Let's just make sure that we're calling this. Actually, let's go ahead and print out the code in here so that we can see the code that we're getting. I don't think the spacing should be an issue. And then make sure that we're getting into the check function. All right. So you'll see that I clicked deploy a little too soon there, and it was unable to deploy with the unsaved function. If this doesn't work, what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste more code, because that's what all good developers do. All right. So we have an error here that was coming up. So you can see it was even storing like an old code that I had typed in there. Where is that? HTML line 89. And that might be because I was like changing some of the names for stuff here. Yeah, so I had in the example code that I had copied and pasted, I had called that code. I had changed a lot of this to be OTP instead of code. So let's try this one more time. This is where doing this locally would probably be a little bit faster, but hopefully we won't have to deploy this too many more times. All right, deployed. The other thing that you might run into is that We do have rate limits for the number of times that you can send this. Still getting an error there, but we'll see if something happens here just by chance. Trying to check things. So still getting an error. Let me go ahead just because we only have a couple of minutes left. This is how you know it's live, right? Um, I'm going to go ahead and show you the example that I know is working. This is basically the same project, or it's the exact same project. But yeah, if you type in the same number too many times, we do have a rate limit that will only send the code to you 5 times within 10 minutes without you checking it within that. So I actually got a new code sent to me, which means that like I think the checking worked on our other function. It just wasn't propagating back to the front end correctly. So the logs have disappeared, but like I think what we had there was probably correct. There was just something with the communication to the front end that wasn't working quite right. Um, but as I was saying, there's like some rate limiting. So if you send the code too many times to the same number, it will not let you do that after 5 times. So while you're developing, you want to make sure that you have a way of checking the code as you go. You can also cancel a pending verification. There's a couple of ways to do that. I have like a whole blog post on how to test verify. If this is something that you get into, I can definitely share that with you. You can see here that this is a verified number now. If I give it like an invalid code here, it'll tell you that it's invalid, and then I can go ahead and put in the real one, and it will tell me that I have the real code. But this is a place that like the Twilio CLI is really handy because I can go ahead and cancel a pending verification if I, get into a situation where I start like, if I keep trying to verify this, it's going to start giving me an error on the back end because I'm hitting rate limits for it. So you can actually like cancel pending verifications as a way to keep your testing progressing. So that's pretty cool. Like we built phone verification in just under an hour. Obviously, like this is not like the prettiest looking form. You might want to throw up a modal for collecting the OTP, probably have a little bit better error handling here. You probably want to do something like use the Lookup API, not to just filter out landlines, but to then send people with landlines a call, or determine you might add radio buttons for the preference in terms of the channel someone wants to receive that one-time passcode in. There's all sorts of ways that you can extend this, but I think this is a really solid place to start for collecting phone numbers, and a really solid place to start with adding some of that account security to the apps that you might be building. Thank you so much for having me. If you have any other questions in the chat, go ahead and drop them in, and I will try to stick around for as long as I can to answer them. If not, you can get in touch with me through Twilio, my Twilio email, or on Twitter. And I really appreciate you having me today, and I can't wait to see what you all build and secure. All right, I'm looking for the blog post. Almost like I looked at this recently. There's a blog post on how to test verify without getting rate limited. If you look at my author page on Twilio, I basically only write about like lookup and verify. So here's like another post about just like how to build international phone number input. I've got lots of posts on this. So this is like a really great place to get started if you want to learn how to build that kind of example app that we started with. This blog post will cover that. There's also lots more things in the code exchange. We used one for international telephone input, but if you want to filter on verify, you can see all of these other things that you could build. This is kind of the classic one-time passcode verification. This is basically what we built today, but as a code exchange project. And then you can see some of the different varieties of things that you can build. This is an example that gets like a little bit more in depth with like retry logic and that kind of stuff. But awesome. Thank you so much for having me. My Twitter handle is my full name. It's at Kelly Robinson. I don't use Twitter that much anymore though.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kelly. It looks like we have some folks with some issues with the promo codes. Feel free to join us on Discord if you want to get some more answers to those. We're going to be just fielding those questions on a case by case basis. But outside of that, thank you so much, Kelly, for joining us. Incredibly informative session. Once again, just want to inform everyone here. The entire workshop has been recorded, so you can check it out once again on our Twitch channels and our YouTube channels. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out, as I mentioned, on Discord. That being said, if you have any other questions, let us know. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Just a couple more seconds here. Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Kelly, for joining us. I look forward to the next workshop that has all types of Twilio SMS stuff featured in it as well. And I for sure definitely learned a couple of things. For the folks that are on the stream right now, make sure you keep it locked in because Wei is going to be doing a workshop right after this. Prove who you are with GPG, asking all the relevant existential questions like who are you and how do you prove who you are, of course with regards to security. That being said, y'all have a great day, and thanks again, y'all.